Hello, I'm Katie Kammler, MU Extension Horticulture Specialist, and I'm going to talk about planning for pest management in cucurbit crops. This video is going to focus specifically on weeds. So, weeds in cucurbits can be a huge problem. Here are some examples that I have seen. On the left, we actually see a lot of foxtail, so a grassy weed, and probably some other ones mixed in other than the sunflowers. On the right-hand side, we actually see Cucurbit and grass in the background. I also see morning glories. So all of these can be a problem, and they can be a problem for multiple reasons. Weeds compete for light, nutrient, water with our desirable crop. These can also harbor insects and disease issues, and not just insects that eat our crop, but also insects that carry disease issues that can be spread to our crop. Another thing weeds do is they can interfere with harvest. It is not very fun to go tripping over morning glory vines. Pumpkin vines are a trip hazard enough, and cockaburs really are not fun to pick in. Not only do they interfere just with the actual practice of harvest, they can also interfere with how harvest happens, how ripening happens, and in that competition mode. So here's a good example of that. On the right-hand side is a nice clean pumpkin patch. That's the one I want to go pick in and make it easy to find pumpkins. The one on the left would not be so fun to pick in. You can actually, if you look closely, you can see orange in that patch, but you also see more weeds than you see those orange pumpkins out there. So one option that is a good weed control option is no-till into a cover crop, but this takes some more planning. So you have to actually plant the transplants, and then you typically have to have equipment in order to plant them, so a transplanter. And in this case, they are no-tilled into a wheat stubble crop, so they're getting two crops out of one section. But this takes a lot more management and planning and equipment. Some other options for weed control, we have to think about, first off, identifying that weed so we know the best control options available. So weeds are divided into either grassy or broadleaf. They can also be annual, biennial, or perennial. And knowing what weed problems you have is important to knowing how best to control them. So some options, tillage or hand pulling or hoeing. Typically, no weed is immune to that. We can get around some of those, although sometimes tillage, depending on what the weed is. If they have an underground rhizome like Johnson grass, we can actually spread it with tillage. So knowing what is in your field is a very important part of planning for weed management. And that starts now in the dormant season and thinking through all of this process. Actually mulching the area, whether that's a plastic mulch or that is once living mulch, like planting into that cover crop in that no-till planting situation. Crop rotation is important. It not only helps with insects and diseases, but it also helps with weed problems. So thinking that through that process and figuring out what works as far as that goes. And then kind of a last resort, or knowing what options you have available. There are herbicide options out there for cucurbits, depending on what cucurbits you are growing. In my examples earlier, I was showing pumpkins, but summer squash and melons are also in the cucurbit family. And they have different options depending on which crop you are actually concentrating on growing. So herbicide options are pre-emergence, which means that is applied before the weed emerges. So it's going after the seed. Post-emergence is after the weed has emerged. And we actually want to target small weeds are much easier to control than when they get big. The Midwest Vegetable Production Guide, which is that first link, has great information on weed control options available in cucurbit crops. And it also has a good section that talks specifically about a weed management plan and thinking through how to best go about controlling those pesky weeds. Also, University of Arkansas has a common cucurbit problems document that also has a good list of options. Another thing to think about if you are using a herbicide option is that herbicides have chemical families. And we really need to switch those chemical families to help prevent resistance. We do know that lots of weeds have resistance to specific modes of action. Because weeds are very, very good at what they do. So make sure that you check that out.